Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio inside Max 6 Conscious Workspace in Tempe, Arizona, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm your host and Phoenix Business Radio Studio CEO, Karen Nowicki, and I am here with a new LinkedIn pal, Chris Damron. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correct. Senior Vice President of Digital Financial Group of Arizona. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. How are you doing this morning?
I am good so far. You know, it's a new day every day. It's often, I don't know, I'm just leaving myself open to whatever transpires. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I went out to actually hike the mountain this morning a little bit and out by the house and got going. So
it's that time of year where us Arizonans, we're looking at 100-degree heat and higher. And how early did you have to get out today to avoid having it be too hot?
Well, I'm a native, so, the heat doesn't bother me so much. And, I think it was, 75 degrees out or something like that today. So
not bad. I was up and watering around 5, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's again that time of year where I'm going to have to get up earlier and beat the sun, so it's not too harsh on my flowers and everything. Where did you grow up here in Arizona?
Pretty much on the west side. I'm a west sider. I went to school at Apollo and then went to ASU after that. So
Apollo, is Apollo even called Apollo anymore?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's
back
on 47th Avenue in Northern.
Yeah, back. I haven't heard that school name. I'm a McClintock graduate from, the 80s when we were a powerhouse football school. I'm sure you remember coming from Apollo back in the day.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's great to have you. Let's get into our conversation, Chris, so our listeners can get to know you. Tell us who you are and a little bit about your company, and we'll go from there.
Chris Damron, a company called Digital Financial Group of Arizona. And basically what we do is we help businesses with credit card processing, merchant services, any type of electronic payment acceptance. I've been in the industry for 23, 24 years, coming from Visa, the second largest processor in the U.S., on that side of the house for about 10 years. And then for the last 15 years, I've been helping merchants and businesses save money on credit card processing. So
I bet you they love you for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I come from a different perspective in that the industry, you can't find a lot of people that provide education of the industry. And instead of, my industry is built on selling pricing, and where I come at it is selling education and how to do things better and improve the process, improve the savings.
My term for that is servant leader, right? Taking care of all of the stakeholders, making sure people are educated and learning and they can make wise decisions. That long-term relationship, of course, is, I think, what we're going for, so that when people have questions or they're thinking they might need to make a change, they're going to remember all the great things that you did for them. And you're going to be the first person they go to say, hey, how about this?
You're dealing with people's revenue streams, right? Or, so you need to build that trust to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, those kind of things. And that goes a long way, for sure.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about this current COVID crisis. I'm curious as to what you're hearing from your clients and how are things going for you as you've made your pivot and adjustments?
Yeah, I got two sides from that. First is the clients, they're all struggling to figure out how to, keep going in this world and keep the wheels turning. So, they don't like, that the fact that they've had to shut down, but they understand the seriousness of it. Now, I think, it's funny, you see a transition. When it first started, there was big unknown, right? So, there's a lot of people that just, shut down because they knew they had to. Now we're getting, 6 weeks in, and now they're starting to go, what's the next step? How are we going to open this back up? They're getting a little antsy.
How have you been supporting your clients in that? What do you find yourself, doing and or asking and giving them for support as they make some of these decisions?
So there's not much I can do on the credit card side, but that's the second piece to it. So about 2 years ago, the city of Peoria engaged ASU to help them create and build this ecosystem for entrepreneurs and startup businesses. I got involved in it late last year and became part of a group that's called Ignite Peoria Entrepreneurs. And the first thing that we did in those first couple of weeks is they enlisted us to reach out to businesses and help support them. So we got on the phone dialing for dollars and just, trying to help, figure out who was open, who was doing takeout, who was just doing Uber Eats or, those kind of things. So we really connected with the business community on that side. And then the second wave kind of came through where, after everybody got shut down, because at first it was, are you still open? Mm-hmm. And then the second wave, once they got shut down, then we made phone calls again to really kind of help them get that list. Peoria created a list of, who was doing takeout. And then the third step in that was, what are you doing to protect yourselves and things of that nature? As well as, we started giving out, SBA, PPP, all of that kind of stuff, because the city of Peoria had a lot of resources that they could lend to that. That's what we did to help that and support that.
It's amazing to me to watch business owners, both small business owners, medium size, all the way on up to enterprise, and our educational, secondary educational systems rise to the occasion, right? It's been fascinating. Those who I thought would be out there, even if they didn't have the answers, kind of leading like you've described. Look, I can't necessarily help you on the credit card side, but I can certainly help you in these other areas, and just showing up for the community and on behalf of everybody. And there are some business owners that kind of, dug a hole in the ground, buried themselves, and went into, I will even use the word of depression and this uncertainty. And it's been fascinating to watch people, how they behave and how they're showing up in something that's been so crazy for all of us.
What's interesting along those lines is, it's kind of taken this on the plus side, right? Now you're seeing all these positive messages come out of it, yes. Right? Before it was a lot of negative stuff, on Facebook and, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And now you just see this whole turn of people coming together, supporting each other, really working together, which is, really interesting. And I think it's great.
It's needed. I can't help but think that that's somehow how the universe created this opportunity for us. That's the way I like to think anyway. Like, okay, where is the silver lining? We went through a personal crisis for 6 months leading into this, where my whole life was shaken. I mean, to the core. So coming into this, I was joking with people. I'm like, COVID-19's got nothing on me, because I've learned how to pivot. I've learned how to find strength where it otherwise wasn't there. I've learned how to keep my business up and running when I've had to step away. So it's been interesting. Like, okay, let me just, put my boots back on and get back at it.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it, right? It'll be interesting to see what changes. One of the things I see is, with everybody going to these virtual meetings and things of that nature, it starts begging the question going, do I have to drive downtown? Do I have to go down there to do them? I just did it for 6 weeks from home, remote. Do I need to go back, and drive across town to do those kind of things? So it'll be interesting to see those kind of changes.
What kind of changes do you hope for professionally? Is there something you've been witnessing and seeing that you're like, oh, that would be great if we kept this up?
I think the virtual side of it, everybody's starting to use the technology, like Zoom and things of that nature. Yeah, I think it's a great way, because look at what it's done for, the environment, and pollution and things of that nature, right?
So. Absolutely. Yeah, Zoom has been great. Prior to the quarantine, our whole business model is around people coming to the studio. We want our host, I'm hosting today, but usually my client is a host. And we want them to have that face-to-face experience with the guests that they've decided to bring into the room. That's where those relationships are built, instead of kind of the aimless networking where you're not sure if you're going to land with the people that you really want to connect with. So we've had to make our pivot, right? We've gone completely online. I'm the only one in the studio. And prior to this, the few times we've had guests from either out of the country, out of the state, they've come on via Skype. People are like, Skype? Who even uses Skype anymore? And it's kind of the It was the AOL of meeting space, online meeting space. And we were using Skype for the last 2 years because it was the best with our live broadcast system. And then when this all happened, I've noticed how Zoom and WebEx and some of the other companies have really risen to the occasion and fixed some of those little nuances that were niggling there and we couldn't really get any traction. And now we've switched, like you and I are today, on Zoom, and we're recording it via video if you decide you want to use that as well. And I am really pleased because, and every time I get on Zoom, I don't know about you, how familiar you are with it. Every time I get on, there's some new thing that really makes sense. I noticed recently if I had more than one guest, we could record separately each of those voices, which is something that we've had to do on our end in the past. So like you, I'm loving the technology. I am a very outgoing personality, but at the same time, I love my home time. So if I don't have to do any extra networking and I can have people come to me and we can do it through the screen, I'm a happy girl.
Yeah, even the networking side, right? You used to have to go to the events and do this, and get out in public and, and then you got to turn on that, that game face and, go at it. And now, you go, well, Zoom works pretty good. And, these WebEx and things of that nature work pretty good. And you can do things where you can get this one-on-one time, a lot better.
Absolutely. And those breakout rooms. And we're all about going right to the core of who we want to connect with and what the purpose of that connection is. And so I see that people are feeling that as well and loving that change. How about you personally? Have you been settling in? Okay, you mentioned hiking this morning. Are you settling into kind of what this looks like for you and the people that you care about? And when you come out of this, is there something that you want to practice or a behavior or something that you're doing with business that you want to bring with you?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's one of those things where, early on, right, we didn't know what it was. But now it's anywhere from no symptoms to, obviously the ultimate, right? Mm-hmm. And it ranges. So it hasn't really scared me to that effect. I'm still, getting out with your friends and things of that nature where we can. Obviously, you take precautions, you wash your hands a lot more, but it definitely makes you think when you go in and you touch something and you're like, okay, I got to not touch my face,
yeah,
or those kind of things. But I'm just as ready as everybody, to get things back open and ready. I'm, ready to go to a restaurant and sit down and have some food and, enjoy the atmosphere and whether that's 6 feet away from somebody else or, doing a temperature scan as you walk in the building, who knows? But I'm ready and I'm hoping that, Doug Ducey or our leaders will probably come out sometime this week with what that plan is. And that's I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just having that plan, right? Because everybody's starting to freak out that there isn't a plan. So
our corporate office is in Atlanta, and I was talking to the other studio partners there, and, Georgia opened up, I think it was a week ago Friday, and just kind of Pandora's box, like, okay, we're open again with some guidelines, but they're getting some backlash now, and I think that we have to do it smart. And I do look forward to hearing from the Arizona government with some of those guidelines. How do you think we ought to open back up just from what you're seeing in your perspective?
I think, like I said, those guidelines of, whether you do a temperature check as you walk in the door, the restaurants or those businesses, will have to do something where, there is spacing, obviously, mm-hmm. and then obviously some disinfectant, right? As soon as, and there's a fine line, right, on that disinfectant, because I've even seen where some people are getting sick from the disinfectant, right, getting burns and things of that nature. So, I think it's a good time. It needs to be a staged approach to it to see kind of how things go. The interesting part about this whole thing is you just don't know what numbers to believe or listen to. That's the toughest thing. And, and then not everybody's getting tested. So that throws the skew completely off, right? So what's the real number? You just don't really know. So, and I don't see that changing, anytime in the near future. So
I don't think it will in the near future. And I mentioned to you before we came on live, we just did a show with some doctors from University of Arizona who are really kind of at the front of this, researching and trying to stay up with all the data. And of course, we've also heard in the news the fear that this is going to circle back around in November, right? And I think it's going to be a while before we really know what all this means for each of us individually. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and the whole loans and the PPPs and things of that nature. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Some of the things that have been disconcerting to me is seeing some of these companies that applied for it, NBA basketball teams and things of that nature, and you're going, and they got millions of dollars, and you're going, come on, what did you need that money for, and why did you apply for that much, So,
yeah.
That money went so fast when you're, having these companies that just awarded millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah. And really, when we look at the landscape of how America is run, we need our enterprises, but we also need our mom and pop, Main Street businesses, because that is really how we got to where we are.
Yeah. And those small businesses and are going to need that help and support for quite some time, probably out of this. So.
Are you seeing in the credit card processing industry, are you seeing any changes? I know there's always the concern around, security, but are you seeing any changes with how people are interacting with the products that you offer?
A couple things. One is, first and foremost, which was kind of surprising to me, is businesses that had typically in the past taken, let's say, 60% cash and 46% cards, now is swapped, right? So, and I really can't, attribute that to anything or figure out why that is. But yeah, these companies that were typically seeing cash now are seeing more cards. I don't know if that's because people aren't traveling to go to the banks to go and get that cash out or what that is. But that's been a very interesting change in this whole course of so.
And how about interest rates? Do you see anything? I know we've had crises in the past and changes. I'm particularly thinking about real estate all those years ago when things just got out of control and people were being taken advantage of, through and through, and some really tight regulations had to come around. How are we feeling about that as it relates to interest rates and that sort of thing?
Yeah, Visa, MasterCard, pretty obviously they're the biggies, right? And they haven't come out with any changes or decreases or things of that nature. 95% of what businesses pay are the fees to the associations of Visa and MasterCard. We haven't seen anything come out as far as them decreasing those rates. But what they did do is usually April and October is when they implement new changes and things of that nature. And they forgo any of the April changes. So they didn't institute any of those. They just kind of left it as is for right now.
Smart business. Yeah. Yep. I can't remember. I was talking to somebody yesterday on a show. And, we were talking about landlords and that sort of thing. And a gentleman who worked for a financial company, he was supposed to be given an opportunity to make a change as to how often he was at his office. And of course, there's an expense that goes with it. And it should have been in April. And a large company, come back and said, hey, we're not allowing for that anymore. And it was not a healthy change. It was one that really upset him and frustrated him because he needs to have that flexibility given everything that's happened. And so that decision was made on behalf of employees, but not necessarily the folks in the industry where the revenue comes from. So it's interesting. I think we said this at the beginning of our segment. We're going to see people who are collaborating more, finding ways to lean across the aisle and help somebody out, in addition to coming up with new technology. And then there are those who are going to make some decisions that are not going to be in the best interest of the community and their stakeholders. And I don't know we're going to see them around in the long haul.
Right. Yeah. It'll also be interesting to see is as we roll back out what the plan is as far as liability. I think that'll probably be the biggest issue, right? You have somebody that comes into your facility and ends up contracting and passes, unfortunately, and what's that liability look like? What are they on the hook for or not on the hook for? So I think that is probably one of the biggest things that our leadership has to decide as they open us back up.
Yeah, I'm on the board for Treasures for Teachers, and it's a big warehouse. It's a membership warehouse that gets donations both from individuals, but also big box businesses to provide classrooms with the much needed supplies, so the teachers themselves don't end up spending that money. And we've talked about reopening the store. When we sat in our board meetings, which are again like this, right? We're all in our own homes when we used to be together. We are asking those kinds of questions of the executive director, so she has that contingency plan. When you do open the doors, how are you going to maintain that safe distance? And are you going to have, a certain number of guests that can come in and shop? And are you going to do the temperature? And, what happens if and when an employee or a customer, we find out that they've gotten sick? What is going to be your way of communicating that back to the people who've been through? And can you track that? Like all those things that we have to think about is a lot. And there's so many different variations depending on the type of business. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I do hope that we are changed for the better as a result. And I know I personally am making a commitment to do that, even in the way that I'm eating and staying healthy and exercising and meditating in the morning. I've really, there's no excuse not to do this right now, especially when the fear can kind of loom very quickly. I'm making sure that I'm grounding myself with the practices that I know that get me through these kinds of things.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been doing is just reaching out to our customer base and seeing how we can help, because what's interesting is, I deal with payments and the credit card processing, and, it's not a very sexy world, right? That, businesses really enjoy. How else can we help? How else can we, help in those situations or these kind of situations? So, providing advice on, I see a lot of business owners or whatever, servers come out and they've got the gloves on and they're, touching the food, but then they're touching credit cards, and kind of advising on those different entities that people just don't think about, right?
Yeah. My daughter works for Red Bull in Brooklyn, and we were fortunate to have her come home about 2 days before they closed the airport. So she's been working from home and working full time. And similar to what you've just described, she is out there, they call it on premise, right? So she's dealing with all the restaurants and the bars. And out of 300 clients that she has in that Brooklyn area, only about 7 are actually providing takeout and delivery. Many of them have closed, and she said that several of them have closed permanently. They're close to retirement. They've been in business for a long time, and they're just like, screw it. We're done. This is our out. And unfortunately, we cannot not be in business. So we've got to pivot and close down and find something else to do. But to your point that I said to her, well, how are you spending all your time? I'm watching you work, in 2 rooms next to me and hearing you on the phone all the time. And she's doing exactly what you're doing as prescribed by her team at Red Bull. Let's stay in front of those customers and those clients of ours so that when we do open back up again, the very first vendor that they're going to call to restock those shelves is going to be Red Bull because of the relationship that Madison built with them, right? So it's the same thing. We got to take care of each other right now. And I've been advising my clients the same way. I had a couple of people say, I think I want to hold off on my show since we can't come to the studio, and we'll start up again when this is all over. And I said, I can support you in that. And let me tell you why, right? That education piece, why I think you ought to stay on board right now, because you don't want your listeners, you don't want your clients, you don't want your customers and your fans and followers to think that you went away and you closed your door, because you're going to have to pick up very heavy when this has all lifted. You're going to have to start over again. And people are going to be wondering, they're not going to be top of consciousness anymore. What happened to so-and-so? If you've been staying out there out front and doing that, those touch points that you've described, then your folks will know that you're there, you care, most importantly, and that you're going to be there for them for whatever service and product you provide. So good for you.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because they're so focused on trying to stay open or, this new realm. I mean, I met with a business owner I was talking the other day, and he got his PPP check, but then it took him 12 hours to figure out and reconcile all of that, right? Because, they're up to 75%, I think is, they don't have to pay back if they use the money or the right way. So then they had to go in through these employees and figure out what they made. Is it better for them to stay on unemployment versus come in? Back on the, working, and all of that. And it really, just trying to crunch through all that took him about 12 hours with his staff, just trying to figure out what was the best course of action for him. Right. So,
yeah. And thank God Yeah, thank God he did do that, because there are likely people who are receiving that money and not savvy enough or don't want to slow down enough to make sure they're making the right decisions, and it's going to come around to bite them later on.
Yeah, it's interesting. With my business, you always get behind the scenes. I always kind of say, with credit card processing, you get to pull the curtain back and see and understand how that business is run. Sometimes you walk into a business and you just go, how is this thing even staying operational function? Are you even making any money? Do you know if you're even making any money? Or, the other end of that is, the person who spent 12 hours, you can see a big difference in, how they operate their business. So you definitely get to pull that curtain back and understand that business a lot better, especially because of, I take the time, like I said, it's not